Richard Lee, we have Jim Garlow, and we have Father Frank Pavone, someplace there in the audience, so I appreciate you. I appreciate you being here.
Hello friends, Father Frank Pavone here, National Director of Priests for Life. Thanks for spending part of your Thursday evening with me. We've got Dinesh D'Souza coming up. Talked to him just the other day right here from this studio, and I want to play for you the fascinating conversation we had, especially about his new film called Trump Card. I know that some of you have seen it. Some of you are mentioning that you have seen it. It's really great. Things we all need to know prior to this culmination of this election. Want to give you some fabulous news on the economic front. That is thanks to President Trump's leadership. It came out today. You may have seen it. It's historic. But before we get to those two things, I want to do as we usually do, say a little prayer, a little reflection really from Pro-Life Reflections for Every Day. So today I take a quote from Living the Gospel of Life, a key document about elections from our United States bishops. By the way, isn't that strange? Those who say, hey, Father, you shouldn't be talking about politics. Don't take your objection here. Go to the bishops. They spoke about politics pretty strongly in that document, Living the Gospel of Life. You know, call them up. Call up your local bishop. Hey, bishop, religion has nothing to do with politics. Call your local bishop. Then you can come back to me and tell me what he says. So they said in this document, Living the Gospel of Life, we urge our fellow citizens to see beyond party politics, to analyze campaign rhetoric critically, and to choose their political leaders according to principle, not party affiliation or mere self-interest. Reflection, politics, though messy, is an opportunity to shape society according to moral principles. Voters must prayerfully discern which leaders will serve them well. The inability to discern that, attacks on life like abortion and euthanasia are evil, should disqualify a candidate. Let us pray. Lord, shine through the eclipse of conscience that afflicts many public officials and give them your wisdom. In Jesus' name, amen. ProLifeReflectionsForEveryday.com is where you can get this book. Well, fabulous and historic economic news today. Gross domestic product, the GDP of a country. You know what that is. It's the total monetary or market value of all the goods, finished goods and services produced in within a country's borders during a specified period of time. You measure income, you measure production, you measure trade, the goods produced and sold and money made and money spent. The gross domestic product, it's basically a scorecard on a nation's economic health. And it is reported by the government annually, and it's also reported quarterly. We just got the third quarter report for 2020. And you can get the gross domestic product in terms of raw numbers of trillions of dollars or you can get it in terms of percentage of growth. Well, today there was a pretty historic announcement. As this third quarter came out, the Bureau of Economic Analysis is what puts this out. And it reaffirms something that the president has been saying. We are coming back and coming back strong. The great American comeback, the president has been saying. And he says, look, we have a V-shaped economic recovery. You've heard him saying that. V-shape, in other words, if you look at a graph of the nation's economic strength, you see that at the beginning of this pandemic, it was like a roller coaster hill. It went all the way down real quick. But now, then you'd say, well, what's the recovery going to look like? If it's a gradual recovery, it looks like a hill, or a slope. But a V-shaped recovery, it's a sharp upward turn, makes it look like a V. Or a super V, if it's really, really steep. We're looking at a super V recovery. And you've also heard the president say, no country has had a smaller economic contraction than we have had, nor a quicker economic recovery after the pandemic than we have had. Reason being that we had a stronger economy than we've ever had prior to this pandemic. Simple reason. It wasn't an economic problem that we've been facing during this pandemic. It was a medical problem. We had to shut the economy down in order to save lives. And I'm going to give you the number here in just a second. Those of you that are just joining us, I'm going to be giving you my interview with Dinesh D'Souza in just a couple of minutes. Got to give you this good news first. And, the gross domestic product report now, percentage-wise, okay, so the percentage of growth, in other words, of economic growth, today broke all records in history. All records in the entire American history. And what we've got here is a rate of 33.1% annual rate of growth of the gross domestic product. This has never happened before in American history. We've never had a GDP percentage like this, 33.1%. Never. It is more than twice the rate, or let's see, roughly twice the rate of the previous record, which was all the way back 70 years ago. In 1950 was the previous record, before I was born. The previous record was 16.7% annual rate of growth. So again, it's all the goods and services of the country produced within its borders in a particular period of time. It's an economic scorecard of our nation's health. With an unprecedented GDP report like we got today, you can say our economy has never been healthier, never been on a healthier path of growth. It's incredible. It shows the leadership of this president. Now, if you compare this with what happened after the 2008-2009 recession under Obama-Biden, to get back the economic output that was lost then, it took the Obama-Biden administration 4 times longer. Let me just read a couple of these things that were said today. The Council of Economic Advisors wrote this morning, while the pandemic hit every major economy around the world, the United States experienced the least severe economic contraction of any major Western economy in the first half of 2020, with the Euro area economy's contraction being 1.5 times as severe as the contraction of the U.S. economy. And then, to summarize, America has gained over, this is not quoting them, America has gained over 11.4 million jobs, recovering more than half of those lost because of the lockdowns. Retail sales are already above, get this, retail sales above the pre-pandemic levels. So we've more than recovered on that. Many construction and manufacturing jobs have returned. Business activity is at a 20-month high. New jobless claims fell to their lowest level this week since before the pandemic. This is a recovery. This is a super recovery. And it's thanks to the fact that we have a president who, better than anyone else, can strengthen this economy, has strengthened this economy, is strengthening this economy. The numbers don't lie. These are not numbers coming from a political campaign. These are numbers coming from economic experts. And you know, that's what makes me laugh about the critics of President Trump. They think that he isn't doing certain things or is doing certain things, and they think that he decides to make up certain numbers and invent certain things and exaggerate other things. Are they completely ignorant of the economic experts that surround and advise the administration? Are they really so unaware and shallow in their thinking, these Democrat critics of President Trump, that they don't realize that when they try to insult him, they're insulting hundreds of top economic experts that have input into all of this? These people are really off the rails. And you know, we have to have, and you know, all the indicators that I see, this election is going to be a great win for us, and a rebuke to the other side, a rebuke to the radical left that is trying to take over the country, trying to destroy the country. Send them out the door. Rebuke them. Bring this argument to an end. Enough with this liberal, left-wing, radical nonsense of rewriting our history and, you know, burning the flag and having riots and killing the unborn and shredding the Constitution and ruining the economy and getting rid of borders and pushing for socialism and globalism and communism. We have to deliver a stinging rebuke to this, and that's why, brothers and sisters, every day we need to be mobilizing more and more voters. And that's what I want to encourage you to continue to do. Put everything else aside, rebuke them, get everybody to the polls, and get them there early. Vote early. We don't have time to talk in detail right now because I'm going to show you Dinesh D'Souza now. But the other thing to keep an eye on is this Biden Incorporated, that Joe Biden lied about what he did and didn't discuss with his son, Hunter, about these business deals by which Biden was using the vice presidency to enrich his family. It's as simple as that. And the evidence is clear, it's undeniable, and we have got to speak the truth. I appreciate Anne Marie's comment, if only more Catholic priests would take a stand like Father Frank is doing. Well, I'll tell you what, because we ought to be motivated by a desire for what's true, right? Honesty. And we see Biden lying to the American people because of this these business deals that his family has been involved in. I see Night Owl is going to a Trump rally in Pennsylvania on Saturday. Oh my goodness, you are going to have such a great time. It is so exhilarating. You know, I'm sure you've watched some of these rallies on TV, and you know, you watch them on TV and you can hear them, but when you're there in person, you feel them. You feel the energy. It literally goes through your whole body and lifts you up. You come out of those rallies exhilarated to the point that there are no words to describe it. So, friends, we are on the path to a great victory here, and we are all part of this victory. Let's make it real. Let's do it vigorously. And let's end this radical left-wing nonsense. These people want communism. They want socialism. They want globalism. They want abortion on demand. You know what? Go to a different country. Start your own country. Or at least, if you don't agree with what the things the president is doing, you know, just take a little bit of time to open your mind and open your ears and learn what this country is about. Because if you're on the side of Biden and these radical Democrats, you know what? I got to tell you really clearly, you really don't understand or appreciate what America is about. Or you really haven't paid attention to what Biden and the Democrats are all about. There are a lot of people who are, they don't realize how bad it has become. Listen, let's win. And we're on that path right now. So, Dinesh D'Souza, well, I'm just going to let you see the conversation that I had with him the other day. He is great, and I want to really encourage you to watch the film that he and I talked about the other day. It is called Trump Card, and let's listen to what he had to say. After that will be the conclusion of tonight's broadcast. So thank you, friends, as always. And now please enjoy Dinesh, and then I'll talk to you in the morning. Well, hello, brothers and sisters. Father Frank Pavone here, National Director of Priests for Life. Welcome to our program. And today I'm very excited to bring to you Dinesh D'Souza. Now, many of you know him. He is someone who has been a public defender of America, I like to say, someone who has come here to this country when he was still a teenager, come from India originally, and he has become a writer, a filmmaker, a public intellectual dealing with the things that our citizens need to know in order to ensure the survival of our country. And as you'll see by our discussion, that is no exaggeration. I am honored to welcome Dinesh D'Souza.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be on the show, and I'm looking forward to it.
You have done some incredible work, and I know a lot of our viewers are familiar with the various films that you've made. Let's do just a little quick summary of what is it, Dinesh? 5 films now that you've made?
Yes, I've got probably 20 books under my belt, but 5 documentary films. The first one was about Obama. I made that in 2012. It was called Obama's America. Then I made a film called America, Hillary's America in 2016, Death of a Nation 2018, and now this year, right now, Trump Card, the new movie that is out, not in the theater, but it's out on DVD and it's out on video on demand. You can basically get it through various platforms on a pay-per-view basis.
We, in our audience, many of them will remember, we talked at great length with our audience about both the book and the film, Death of America, especially during our recent midterm elections. And I just recently obtained and watched Trump Card. So I want to talk about these. But let me frame this discussion in terms of this question, Dinesh. I have, as a priest, been very vocal in support of President Donald Trump and the Republicans. And many people have asked me, but why are you as a priest being so political? We don't usually hear this from the clergy. And I point out something that our Catholic Church says in her official documents. The church says, look, the church advocates the kingdom of God. The church is not a political party, does not have primarily a political mission. However, although we are usually not advocates in the political arena, when the fundamental, and here I'm quoting exactly the Second Vatican Council, canon law, and other documents, when the fundamental rights of man or the freedom of the church and the salvation of souls are at stake, then we need to speak up even politically. And the argument I've been making is that this election, and not necessarily excluding some of our recent elections either, but this election is not any kind of a normal choice between, let's say, different ideas about how to get to the same goal or different plans about how to implement the same principles. We're talking about a choice between 2 very different goals and 2 very different sets of principles. And as I read and listen to what you have presented to the public, am I hearing very much the same message?
Very much so. Let me frame it this way. When Reagan ran for the presidency in 1980, he said that he was running on 5 sort of key themes. And these 5 themes will all resonate, I think, with Christians because they dovetail with the things that we consider important. So number one, the idea of the individual, this notion that we are created equal in the eyes of God. We're individuals. 2, the idea of the family. 3, the idea of the church and the independence of the church. 4, the idea of local communities, in other words, making decisions by and large at the decentralized level. In Catholicism, it's the principle of subsidiarity. And finally, the country, patriotism, the flag, the national anthem, and so on. Now, we realize with some consternation that the socialist left today rejects all 5. They reject the idea of the uniqueness of the individual. Now that bears upon the pro-life issue, but it also bears upon the idea that they don't like this notion of the individual rising up by your bootstraps, improving your circumstances, being the architect of your own destiny. They think all that's an illusion. 2, they don't like the family. It's too patriarchal, it's oppressive. 3, they don't like the church. They will impose differential restrictions on the church that they won't impose, for example, on a political protest. 4, they don't like local self-government. And 5, they don't like the national anthem. They don't like the flag. They're rewriting the history of the country to make it one series of uninterrupted crimes against minorities. So you see here how you can almost call it the common fabric of American life, the kind of moral grounding of our national experience, at least as Reagan summarized it, as I identify with it as an immigrant. This is being flatly rejected by really an alien philosophy that's failed all over the world. It's the most discredited idea since slavery. And yet, wow, here it is back in the mainstream of American politics. And that's what's on the ballot in November.
You know, in Death of a Nation, you took a very historical approach looking at the Democrat Party and its origins and in where it got so many of its ideas and policies. And in Trump Card, you're really taking a look at the present and this current battle that is going on and the forces that President Trump has had to deal with over these last almost 4 years. Tell us, where does this, you outlined this wholesale rejection of fundamental principles on which we stand. Where does this reside today? You mentioned leftists and socialism. What's the relationship between that and the Democrat Party that people are going to see on the ballot?
The Democratic Party is a progressive party, and progressivism is an ideology that developed in the early part. Well, it goes back to the late 19th century, but in the early 20th century, you had 3 philosophies that came to the forefront, and they were sort of cousins. So socialism, fascism, progressivism. All these philosophies are on the left side of the aisle, by which I mean they're opposed to the free market. They are philosophies of the strong centralized state. And even though the Democrats have been progressive now for almost 100 years, they've rejected explicit socialism. In that sense, Bernie Sanders is a kind of an outlier. But the Democrats have moved more in the direction of socialism than ever before. The socialist influence is greater now than at any time in the party's history. And you get the feeling that with the Joe Biden, he's sitting in a canoe, but the socialists they're in charge of the oars. They're the ones steering the boat. Biden is a kind of traveler in the canoe, but he's not directing the canoe. So socialism here, by socialism, what we're talking about is a philosophy of centralized government, but it's a great mistake to think of socialism purely in terms of economic confiscation. That it is true that Marx focused on the economic dimension of socialism, a class divide between the rich and the poor. But for today's socialists, they care more about abortion than the minimum wage. They care more about the transgender bathroom than they do about universal basic income. So there's a cultural Marxism that runs alongside the economic socialism, and both are treated extensively in the movie Trump Card.
Yes, and brothers and sisters, for those of you that are just joining us, we are honored today to be joined by Dinesh D'Souza, author, filmmaker, public scholar, defender of America and our values, and he recently released, really just earlier this month, Trump Card, a film we want to urge you to watch before you cast your vote in this election. So tell us, Dinesh, a little bit more about this Trump Card. What is the main message that it conveys?
Well, the title, of course, I picked only because Trump is the dominant figure in this election. Even the people voting for Biden are kind of voting against Trump. So it reminds me of the line from Julius Caesar, he stands astride the world like a colossus, and that's Trump. He sets the terms of the debate. Now, that being said, the main theme of the movie is socialism and how an idea that was tried in 25 countries in the last century collapsed everywhere. All the big countries, Russia, China, India, abandoned socialism. How can an idea that is the most discredited idea since slavery, how can it make a comeback and find itself now in the mainstream of American politics, an appealing doctrine to a lot of young people and shaping the course of the Democratic Party? So the movie looks at how we got here, who's behind this socialism, why it's evil, and finally how we can stop it.
Now, of course, this has connections, doesn't it, very much with your personal life, because you, as we mentioned earlier, are originally from India, and your wife, isn't she from Venezuela?
Yes, Debbie, my wife, and I have both experienced socialism, not exactly in the same way, because India was a very poor country when it got independence in 1947. But the Indian leaders had studied in England and they picked up this Fabian socialism from the British. You can almost say socialism was the last export of colonialism. And so they introduced it to India for 40 years. It was a horrific failure. I remember growing up, my family had a ration card which said you could only buy so much rice and so much sugar and so much cooking oil. We were on a 7-year waiting list to get a phone. So socialism to me is symbolized by scarcity, by misery. India was sort of the begging bowl of the world. Now, interestingly for Debbie, when she grew up in Venezuela, in the late 60s and early 70s, Venezuela was a very prosperous country. It was a capitalist country. It had a multi-party system. And Hugo Chavez, the socialist, was not elected until the late 1990s. And he was a very patient man. He waited 7 years before starting the Socialist Party of Venezuela. But over the past 20 years, this oil-rich, successful country has been reduced to rubble by socialism. Now, India is doing better today, but that's because the Indians have moved away from socialism. So, yes, we've got a lot of experience with socialism in our family. We are not fans of it because we know what it does and we know what it'll do to America.
So what are some of the signs that we're moving in that direction, or at least the Democratic Party has been infected by this? I know one of the things that struck me in the movie was, we hear these Democrat candidates talking about the gun violence and gun control and whatnot, and you brought out the point about how that was one of the first things done in Venezuela to institute this new kind of regime. Tell us the connection on that issue and some of the other issues that the Democrat Party is embracing that would tell us that we're moving in the wrong direction.
Well, the leftists who are champions of socialism like to say that they are following the model of Scandinavia, and they're not following the model of Venezuela. But the truth of it is they're following the Venezuelan model. And this is very clear when you look at their actions. So, for example, they do not knock down Columbus statues in Scandinavia, but they do in Venezuela, and the left does that in America. They don't demonize the rich in Scandinavia, but they do and did in Venezuela, driving many entrepreneurs out of the country. And of course, the rhetoric of people like Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, if you take away their demonization of the rich, you would render them completely mute. That's all they say. That's all they do. Third, gun confiscation. In Venezuela, they confiscated the guns, and the moment the citizens were vulnerable, they unleashed a reign of terror against them. Here, too, there's a talk of confiscating guns. Antifa. There's no Antifa in Scandinavia, but Venezuela has its own version of Antifa. It's called the Colectivos. Essentially, it's a group of criminals who have been released by the socialist state to do what? To go terrorize small business, to do arson, to beat up on political dissidents. So the exact kind of street thuggery that Antifa and Black Lives Matter are doing in this country, they have their equivalent in Venezuela. And finally, the Chavistas, socialist class, lives high on the hog. When Hugo Chavez died, he was a billionaire. Again, in Scandinavia, you won't find a politician ever who has gone from 0 to 100 million euros on a government salary. Never happens. But it's happened here with the Clintons. It's happened with Al Gore. We now know about the Biden scandal. Biden is basically, the Biden scandal isn't about Hunter Biden. It's about Joe Biden using his family members, including his son-in-law, as bagmen. They go with him on these foreign trips. They make side deals with government officials. And when they all get home, they put all the money on the ground and they all take their share of the loot, just like a typical mafia family. And Joe Biden is the ringleader of it. And it's now come out, and the media may try to suppress it, but I think the cat is out of the bag.
Yeah, that's for sure. Well, for those that are just joining us, friends, we're with Dinesh D'Souza, creator of this movie, Trump Card, which Dinesh, before we go further into the substance of this, how can people get hold of this and watch it before Election Day?
Trump Card, unlike my other films, is not in the theater. It's on demand. TrumpCardTheMovie.com is the website. The good news is it just went up on Amazon Prime. It's available through Apple iTunes, through Google, through YouTube, Vudu, some of the cable platforms, Xfinity, Comcast. So there are many different platforms. You can watch it on any device, your phone, your tablet, I prefer you watch it on your big screen TV because it was made actually for the big screen. So it's a movie with that kind of reach and power. And so I would say go to your big screen TVs, pick out Apple iTunes or pick out Amazon Prime, search for the movie Trump Card, and boom, you can watch it right there tonight.
And I'll say to our friends that are watching, when you sit down to watch this, be ready to be like a sponge, okay, that is going to be put under a waterfall because the information, the insights, Dinesh, the interviews, the style of this is very fascinating because you're making your points, you're developing your points, but then you're going from one fascinating interview to the next with all these different people. And before we get into some of those specific interviews, I want to touch on a very touching moment. I think it's at the beginning of the movie, if I recall, when you're getting a phone call from President Donald Trump. This first of all, I've been talking about the fact that, this is really a man who connects with the people. He is a man of tremendous character, kindness, generosity, and strength. And you've experienced that personally, haven't you? Bring us to that moment and tell us a little bit about, your own personal connection with Donald Trump.
Well, I had been targeted by the Obama administration for prosecution for the heinous crime of giving $20,000 of my own money to a college friend of mine who was running for the Senate in New York. I did exceed the campaign finance law, but typically this is met with a warning or a fine. Recently, the FEC sent a letter to the Biden campaign listing 200 pages of donors who had exceeded the campaign finance limit. There was no talk of either indicting them or prosecuting them or putting 10 FBI agents on them. The idea was maybe you just want to return the excess money, and that's the end of the story. So that's how this is normally handled. But in my case, I was severely prosecuted. I was locked up overnight in a federal confinement center for 8 months. I had mandatory psychiatric counseling, all kinds of stuff. I had to pay a big fine. The whole thing cost me $500,000. So the bottom line of it is I would have been a lifelong felon at the end of it, except that I got a pardon from the president. And what I think was very striking is that when Trump called on the phone, I'd never met him. He didn't owe me a pardon. He didn't know me. He wasn't paying off a favor of any kind. He just goes, I knew your case was BS. And he said the word, and I was like, wow. But he was like, I knew it was fake. It was bogus, and I'm in a position to fix it. And so, hey, I'm going to give you a pardon in the morning. End of story. And the beauty of this is that any other Republican would have been like, let me call my advisors together. Is this strategically a prudent thing to do? What is the left going to say? What will the headline in the New York Times be tomorrow? Well, let's have a focus group on this. No, for Trump, it was a gut issue of a wrong has been done. I happen to be in a position to fix it, and I'm going to do it.
Yes, and that's a pattern that comes across so regularly with him. I love to listen to the stories that he tells, sometimes others are telling, where he'll just connect with people. He'll listen to people. He says, look, I consider you, in talking to the public, I consider you to be the elite. We're the elite. This is not just a campaign. This is a movement. And then, of course, as you know, and this started after Trump card was released, this phenomenon, I'd really love your insight into this phenomenon of the people at his rallies chanting, "We love you." Now, I don't think we've ever heard this in American politics. 4 more years, yes, but "we love you." And I think it's a direct result of the fact that he loves us. He fights for the American people, and he connects in that human way, the same way he connected with you and dealt with your issue. He does this for all of us, and he fights for us and for what we stand for. What have your thoughts been as this "We love you" chant has been emerging at these rallies?
I think it shows how interesting it is that you've got this guy who has lived this kind of rarefied life and is a billionaire, and yet he's unlike any other billionaire that I know. Now, Debbie and I know about a dozen of them, and they're a varied group. But the bottom line of it is none of them are like Trump. And the truth of it is none of them even understand Trump. They have a little bit in general of a disdain for Trump because they feel like he's a little bit of a plebeian. He's a little bit of a sort of rough cut billionaire. He doesn't really have taste. He doesn't really have class. But another way to put it is that none of those guys could identify with an ordinary guy who's driving a truck. None of those guys would have anything to say to a doorman who opened a door for them at a hotel. But I have a feeling that Trump himself, in his early days, was a doorman. And he did stuff like that. And he learned from the bottom up, kind of the way that a great chef learns to be a busboy and then learns how to just, cut onions. And so Trump has been through it. And so he's got that common touch that makes him very exceptional as a member of the sort of billionaire class. And I think that is really the key to his political accessibility, the fact that the ordinary guy feels that they could approach Trump and they could have a normal conversation with him.
And getting back then to the substance of Trump card, you talked about, this socialist dynamic is about the centrality of the state, concentration of power and control there. You brought up the same thing, of course, in Death of a Nation. I found it very striking when you were comparing the Democrat platform and their policies with those of the Nazi Party, and a lot of times people will, they'll hear this kind of language and they'll say, "Oh, this is an exaggeration. This is extreme." But this is where Donald Trump is the nightmare for the left, isn't he? I mean, he just stands right in the way of this kind of dynamic. I mean, he's stopping it. He's reversing it. Tell us more about that.
Well, I think that Trump has a bit of a secret weapon, and that is having come out of American popular culture with his background as an author, with The Apprentice. He's someone who's lived in pop culture. And he knows rappers. He's promoted boxing events. He's promoted mixed martial arts. So this is a guy who has sort of has one foot deeply in American popular culture. And that gives him a big advantage over the typical Republican politician for whom pop culture is really something quite alien, quite remote. Trump also fights both in the political battlefield and on the cultural battlefield. That too is a big change. He recognizes the political battlefield as being only one corner of a kind of larger arena. Trump has had to face the phenomenon of the deep state. And by this, I mean the police agencies of government, which have become corrupted at the top. This is something that happened under the Clintons and under Obama. Reagan never had to face this. Reagan wouldn't have to dream that the FBI was somehow conspiring to deny him re-election or to do illegal surveillance on him. So this is why I think Reagan would be a fish out of water in today's America. But Lincoln wouldn't, because the waters were even more roiled when Lincoln came to Washington. So the bottom line of it is Trump, I think, has shown us how to fight. He's shown Republicans that we have to be tough. He's also shown us that when we are just the party of the nice guys and we're passive, the left will take advantage of us. They knock down our monuments and they believe we will never knock down their monuments. They threaten to pack the court in the full confidence that we would never dream of doing the same. They deploy the deep state against us thinking, well, wow, even if those guys controlled the government, they would never use the deep state against us. So all of these questions are now forced upon us, which is to say, if we don't do to them what they are doing to us, how do we make them stop?
You mentioned Lincoln, and when we watch this movie, it's put in the context of seeing Lincoln on a train throughout. Tell us go a little deeper for us into the connection with Abraham Lincoln and what Donald Trump is facing.
Well, let's think for a moment about Lincoln and what set off the Civil War. Because people go, well, the Civil War, was it really about slavery or was it really about something else? Well, one thing it was undeniably about is this. A Republican, really the first Republican, was elected president legitimately and got an electoral majority. And the Democrats went berserk. They refused to accept the result. They would rather break up the country than endure the prospect of a Republican presidency. Well, think of the chilling similarity between that and Trump's election in 2016. A Republican elected, close election, but no one denies a legitimate election. The Democrats to this day have not really fully come to terms with the result. And they have been deploying, as in their own words, any means necessary to try to capsize this presidency. Lincoln, in 1863, the Union Army for the first time began to deploy black soldiers. And the Confederates were so outraged that they issued an edict that any black soldier captured by the Confederacy would be shot. Not white soldiers who were normal prisoners of war. And now we showed the scene in the movie. When it came to Lincoln's attention, he signed what is called by historians the Order of Retaliation, an order of retaliation. And Lincoln basically said this: for every black Union soldier executed by the Confederacy, one Confederate captive will be shot. Now, again, why would a moderate man do something that is so extreme? And the answer is simple. Lincoln knew that if you don't do to them what they're doing to you, they won't stop. And in fact, when Lincoln issued the order, the Confederates did stop. They stopped the practice and Lincoln withdrew the executive order. So you see here, I think this is to me a metaphor for our situation, which is to say that we have to hold these guys accountable. If you don't hold the deep state accountable, it will continue its shenanigans. If an Antifa guy breaks a window and nobody arrests him, he'll break every window in the neighborhood. They interpret our passivity as a measure of their success.
Mm-hmm. You know, you had some fascinating interviews in this movie. What were one or two of the ones that impressed or surprised you the most, and what do we take away from them?
Well, since you watched the movie, you know that there's a certain kind of fearlessness that characterizes it. In two areas where I decided to go, where most people probably wouldn't, is one, there's an interview in which I interview a guy named Larry Sinclair talking about his allegations of sexual involvement with Barack Obama. In other words, that he was a gay prostitute, in effect, who was used by Barack Obama on more than one occasion. Now, the reason I did this was I wanted to look at the issue of the media and the way the media covers really uncorroborated allegations against Trump. You just have to say it, and you're in 60 Minutes. Look at Stormy Daniels. She's everywhere. Well, what about this guy, Larry Sinclair? He had a press conference, but he was never covered. The allegation wasn't even mentioned in the New York Times or the Washington Post, never mentioned on NPR, never mentioned on CNN or CBS or ABC. A media blackout, very similar to the blackout we're seeing now with regard to the Biden computer scandal, the corruption scandal. So these people aren't real journalists. That's my point. It's not even that they're biased. They have press badges, but they're not real reporters at all. They're sort of like lobbyists, or they're like paid operatives of the Democratic National Committee. You know, if someone said a paid operative of the Democratic National Committee says X, I'm not even interested in listening. I don't give any weight to that at all. So we have to learn to reduce the power of the mainstream media in our own mind. A second theme in the movie, the intervention of radical Islam in our politics. That's not something that's been in the news. We hear all this talk about Russia collusion, you know, and what it amounts to is 4 Russians who bought a Facebook ad for $5,000. It's just stupid. But the truth of it is radical Islamic regimes. I'm not talking about Muslims organizing politically. I'm talking about regimes like Iran using intermediaries like Qatar to pump money into American think tanks, pay American journalists, use the money to support socialist candidates like Ilhan Omar. So we go into this in the movie, and it's a sort of a frightening sidelight of the movie, the way in which permissive, the secular left, which is very permissive, is somehow weirdly allied with radical Islam.
Well, Dinesh D'Souza, we have only scratched the surface of this tremendous work that you've given us. I really want to urge as strongly as I can, our viewers, obtain and watch as soon as you can Trump Card. It is a marvelous preparation for this election. And Dinesh, once again, how can they get hold of it?
TrumpCardTheMovie.com. If you want to get it right off your TV, go to Amazon Prime or Apple iTunes. It's on YouTube, it's on Google, it's a whole bunch of places, and you can order a physical DVD from Walmart.com or Target.com.
And Death of a Nation, of course, is still available as well, right? Where would people get that? That's both the book and the movie.
Yes, absolutely. All my movies are out there and available, and they form a sort of tapestry. So I would recommend starting with the latest one, Trump Card, because it's right about what's going on right now in the headlines. But then you can weave your way all the way back to the Obama movie, which is interesting to watch now. I sort of made a prediction about what Obama will turn out to be, and you can judge for yourself whether this was accurate or not.
Fantastic. Well, I want to thank you on behalf of countless people, not the least of whom are among our faithful viewers here at Priests for Life, for all the work that you've done, the suffering you've endured, the courage that you've shown, the love for America that you've demonstrated, and the motivation that you've given us to work hard for our country and for this president. Thank you. I look forward to connecting with you again and frequently, I hope, and let's labor together until we have the victory. Thank you, Dinesh D'Souza.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
I think we have Richard Lee, we have Jim Garlow, and we have Father Frank Pavone. Someplace they were in the audience, so I appreciate you. I appreciate you being.
Follow him, Father Frank Pavone, Fr. Frank Pavone on Twitter. He is the National Director of Priests for Life. Please go to priestsforlife.org.